1883, a pivotal moment in history took place. Francis Galton published his book, Inquiries into Human Faculty and Its Development, coining the controversial term eugenics. In his book, he proposed that by using selective breeding to increase supposedly desirable genetic traits and decrease undesirable ones, we could maintain the purities of humanity. Although Galton's ideas were both scientifically flawed and unethical, they quickly spread from England to the United States in the early 20th century. Inspired by his work, Madison Grant published The Passing of the Great Race in 1916, which promoted racist eugenic pseudoscience. From here, eugenics rapidly snowballed in popularity, setting the stage for a dark chapter in U.S. history. In his book, Grant states that Europeans are genetically superior to all other races and advocates for policies that preserve white racial purity. For example, he proposes that they must establish large colonies for the Negroes and allow them outside only as laborers and not as settlers. Grant's book was a national bestseller. It helped bring the movement into the mainstream, sparking a rise of eugenics across science, culture, and politics in America throughout the 1920s.
Eugenics corrupted entire fields of science, from genetics to anthropology and psychology. Flawed intelligence testing methods were developed to supposedly demonstrate racist views on intelligence and ability.
Prominent institutions like the Cold Springs Harbor Laboratory were founded specifically to study eugenics. Other institutions like the American Eugenics Society and the Eugenics Record Office serve as a hub for eugenicists to share their beliefs and to promote eugenics to the public as a valid science, thus leading more people to adopt eugenics beliefs.
Conducted different studies to scientifically validate their racism and discriminations. One prominent example of this was the twin studies, which showed inherited racial differences in IQ and behavior. However, these were entirely unscientific because they were rooted in bias. Additionally, tens of thousands of Americans were forcibly sterilized because they were deemed genetically unfit using flawed metrics. This represents a disturbing, unethical era of science corrupted to promote a racist agenda.
Laws and policies across America were profoundly influenced by the eugenic ideology in the 1920s. In 1914, Indiana passed the first state-level sterilization law. By 1928, over 60,000 Americans were forcibly sterilized to prevent unfit people from reproducing. Virginia's 1924 Racial Integrity Act prohibited interracial marriage. This act created a required test for immigrants 16 years and older to test their basic literacy skills and their comprehension skills in their language. Virginia's 1924 Racial Integrity Act prohibited interracial marriage. This act created a required test for immigrants 16 years and older to test their basic literacy skills and their comprehension skills in their language.
One of the most reprehensible examples was in 1927 when the Supreme Court case Buck v. Bell upheld the right of states to forcibly sterilize citizens who were genetically unfit. Carrie Buck was the first person to be sterilized after giving birth to her child. She had been committed to the Virginia State Colony for epileptics and feeble-minded. Buck's legal guardian argued that this sterilization violated her 14th Amendment right and took this case to the Supreme Court. This case demonstrated how eugenics had corrupted the entire legal system, making fundamental human rights secondary to eugenic goals.
The eugenics movement led to the immense suffering and harm for minority groups, people with disabilities, and the marginalized in America. It was used to justify racism, discrimination, and the loss of basic human rights.
People were subjected to concrete policies rooted in white nationalism and pseudoscience, from immigration limitations to forced sterilization. In order to enlarge the group of the eugenics movement to the general public, scientists and those alike would promote stereotyping and the judgment of facial characteristics. These events were known as better baby competitions. They arose to manipulate women into a popular, empowering belief that if their baby was pale, blonde, and blue-eyed with a narrow nose, he or she was dignified, beautiful, and intelligent. These were clear tactics to include parents and especially women into the movement. A great proprietor of involving women into the movement was Margaret Sanger, a prominent feminist from the early 20th century, represents a compelling case study in duality. Her advocacy spanned both feminist activism and eugenics ideals, leaving behind a complex legacy. Sanger's campaign for women's access to birth control and family planning became clearly intertwined with her eugenicist vision. In her perspective, eugenics offered a means to empower women by granting them greater control from their reproductive choices. She firmly believed that integrating eugenics principles into Planned Parenthood would lead to an enhancement in overall health and well-being of individuals and society as a whole. She perceived this approach as a strategy to mitigate the propagation of genetic disease and alleviate the strain of social welfare systems. On the other side of this coin, Carrie Buck emerged as a notable outspoken victim of the destructive practices of scientific categorization, her life becoming tragically intertwined with one of the most infamous cases in the annals of American history. It not only legitimized the practice of eugenics in the United States, but also perpetuated harmful stereotypes and discrimination against marginalized groups. In this case, the young and poor. They called her unfit and feeble-minded. It stated that instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring, society can prevent those who are manifestingly unfit from continuing their kind. U.S. Supreme Court, 1927. The United States failed to administer justice during that trial, subsequently perpetuating victimization, not only against Carrie, but also against other marginalized groups, a pattern that persisted until the conclusion of the eugenics movement in the late 1940s.
As eugenics continued to thrive, a certain historical figure was taking an interest in the movement. That person was Adolf Hitler.
In a letter he sent to Madison Grant in the 1930s, he thanked him for writing The Passing of the Great Race, referring to it as his Bible. It was from these ashes that World War II arose. After the horrific actions committed in the war, the eugenics movement lost widespread support. However, its ideologies persisted as societal norms, practices, and policies for decades more. This is especially true for sterilization laws. Currently, 32 states in America allow forced sterilizations, and the majority of victims are African American women.
Looking forward, this part of American history highlights a key message, that science and data must be wielded carefully and ethically for the benefit of all people. Therefore, only by referencing the past can we build a moral and just future.
Eugenics science represented a shift as to what was scientifically accurate in America. The global beliefs about scientific facts justify the creation of discriminatory political policies. Biased opinions that are believed to be purely scientific still influence political decisions today. One prominent example of this is abortion policies. When comparing forced sterilization to abortion, we must consider the legality of it. Although both of these are not morally wrong in itself, once we take away the right of a person to choose whether or not to participate, then these practices become wrong. Even so, forced sterilizations are still practiced today, as over half the states allow disabled people to be forcibly sterilized. Additionally, the science of eugenics is still significant in modern genetic engineering research. In contrast to past eugenics research, though, genetic engineering has a more positive outlook and aims to eliminate diseases.
Worldwide, eugenics inspired other political movements, most notably Nazi Germany and the discrimination of a non-Aryan race. Discrimination based on eugenics beliefs still stands today, just less prominently. Intolerance tied to eugenics beliefs still influences politics, even if not obvious. This serves as a strong reminder of the lasting effects of these harmful ideas. In politics, it's crucial to keep tackling the remains of eugenic thinking for a fairer and more just system.
The eugenics movement was a major and long-lasting turning point in American history, not only in the States, but also around the world. The wide acceptance of eugenics represented a shift in thinking as it supported beliefs of racism, ableism, and other oppressive opinions. These ideas were then translated into scientific practice through forced sterilizations and genetic studies, as well as government decision-making through immigration laws. Despite this, eugenics also played a large role in the development of genetic studies and reminded scientists of the importance of using ethical codes in their practice. But whether or not the effects were harmful or beneficial, the prevalence of these factors prove that everything the eugenics movement has taught continues to define America to this day.